line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Hope believe, then me pull up, do some bucks down. Tired, tell the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best for my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify tap, you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, it's too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the lead to see what's planted. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Bought at that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant of minus, my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in this alone. With Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded the whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose to defy the facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way, yeah. The biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a special edition of Live and Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luke Mon Nation, the most dangerous show on social media anywhere. And I am really, really excited tonight because I've been wanting to have the folks on who we're talking to tonight for a minute. But, you know, our schedules have been nuts. Things have been crazy. And, you know, last week happened. And I figured, you know, when I was watching the news, that there was something that the media was not telling people about the history of, I don't know, protest, if you want to call it, at the U.S. Capitol. There's a history that they left out. Some of it, there's another reason why they don't mention some of the other kind of incursions have happened at the U.S. Capitol. But this particular history, I think, is really important because, see, they don't tell you this happened because then they'd have to explain the actions of this government toward our brothers and sisters in a U.S. colony, still a U.S. colony. But before we get into this, I want to say thank you all so much for joining us tonight for this conversation. Thank you so much for your support. You can find us on Patreon. If you like our content, you want to help us out, you want to support us, we would appreciate that so much. You can find us on patreon.com/LukeMonNation. Of course, subscribe to us here on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter, LukeMonNation, the number 1, no spaces, and you can like us on Facebook at Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luke Mon Nation. And I am going to stop talking because I must introduce to you my comrades at TELE-JAGUAR, Matt Cedillo, Ernesto Ayala, and Karina Acri-Payez. I've been so wanting to talk to you guys for the longest time. Luke Mon Nation, welcome TELE-JAGUAR. TELE-JAGUAR, welcome to Luke Mon Nation. What's up, comrades? How are y'all doing? Uh-oh.
Doing great. Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
I'm so so excited that you all were able to join me tonight because, like I was saying at the beginning, right, this conversation that we're having about the fascist attack on the U.S. Capitol, yeah, what happened last week is important, right? And it's a big deal, and it's very scary for the empire for sure because I didn't think they thought a bunch of white people would ever do such a thing. But if they'd listened to us, they would have seen it coming. But they didn't. But there's a part of this history about uprisings that have been staged at the U.S. Capitol that I knew that they weren't telling. And the more corporate media I watched, and these talking heads would say, this kind of thing has never happened in the 220 year history of the U.S. Capitol. I'm sitting there like, I think they're leaving some shit out. Why are they telling the truth about? And of course, I'm thinking about the Puerto Rican nationals who stormed the U.S. Capitol, and I can't remember what year it was. But this is why I wanted you all to tell this story, because I like for the people who carry the DNA of the struggle in them to tell their part of the struggle so that we can find ways to connect ourselves and each other, because we all share the same DNA in us, the same DNA of struggle. So what am I talking about, Karina, when I'm talking about the Puerto Rican nationals storming the U.S. Capitol? What did that mean, and why was it even done?
Okay, so Matt Cedillo will be talking. First of all, Jackie, thank you so much for having us on. We are so honored to be here, and I have been secretly hoping we may be able to do at some point since I met you in 2017. I think we did a panel together at American University about racism in the post-Trump era.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
wow, yeah. I think, man, you should have just sent me a message and asked.
Well, we're very tried to be gracious and see if you unite us. But so yes, the armed attack was in 1954 by the Puerto Rican nationalists, and Matt Cedillo can talk. He's going to talk a little bit about an overview and a broader context. But if you want to start with a rundown of like the 50s and what was the immediate impetus to the 1954 storming the Congress, it's oh, and there's a fun fact about Lolita Lebron, which was one of the armed revolutionaries. She was born in the town of Lares, Puerto Rico, which was very famous for a revolt led by indigenous Puerto Ricans against the Spanish occupation in 1868. So this is a woman, that contributes to her, revolutionary character and image, and a little bit more about the critical role that she played amongst the four who stormed the Capitol. So against the backdrop of this rise in Puerto Rican nationalism, we can kind of hone down our focus to the beginning of the 1950s in U.S. politics. And so the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party in the 1950s was calling for independence from the U.S. government, and they were demanding the recognition of the 1897 Carta de Autonomía and Puerto Rico's international sovereignty. So it repudiated the Estado Libre Asociado, which was established in 1950, and continued the colonialism. So they were directly responding to this reaffirmation of U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico in 1950. And this caused a increased tension among Puerto Rican nationalists, obviously, and the United States. So in the 50s, the U.S. granted permission, and we'll think about that language, permission to Puerto Rico to draft its own constitution. What happened with that? Well, the Nationalist Party, which had already been facing domestic suppression by the U.S. for the past 2 decades, were outraged by this colonial move, and granting permission that you can draft your own constitution, of course, which would be up for rule by the colonial oppressor state, so you could just be spinning your wheels. But when the party incited some uprisings in Puerto Rico as a result of this reaffirmation of colonial control. And the United States sent fighter planes with machine guns to quell the riots in Puerto Rico. And 9 Puerto Rican nationalists were killed by the United States as they were attempting to quell these nationalist uprisings. And then another key event in 1950 was when one Puerto Rican nationalist attempted to assassinate the president in Washington, D.C. at the Blair House, and Harry Truman was living there at the time. So the 2 Puerto Rican nationalists were involved in that one. It was a husband and a wife, I believe, or partners. The woman was killed in at the scene, and the man survived. So by the 1952, the Puerto Rico had drafted a constitution, and 82% of Puerto Ricans supported that, but the nationalism was increasing also behind this, and their leader, Pedro Albizu Campos, was in prison at the time, but he was still determined to fight for independence. So simultaneously, he was calling for more revolutionary actions in the United States against the oppressor state. This culminated in a plan that was executed on March 1st, 1954, with 4 Puerto Rican nationalists. They were all Puerto Rican born, living in the United States. Their names were obviously Lolita Lebron, which we just mentioned. The second was Rafael Cancel Miranda. The third was Andres Figueroa. And the fourth was Irvin Flores Rodriguez. And their intention was to go to Congress, and they brought lots of arms. Their intent was to die for Puerto Rican nationalism. It wasn't so much to slaughter everyone. They brought the arms to see, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. But the intention was to bring the recognition to the plight of Puerto Ricans and what had been happening. Lolita was very instrumental in this attack on Congress, because the 3 men that she was with actually got cold feet that morning when they took a train to New York, and they didn't want to go through with it. But she told them that she was going anyway, and that she was not alone. And what I think she meant by that is she has the strength, the support of her people behind her. So she was ready to go in alone. And the 3 men conceded to execute the plan. This was a time when there weren't a lot of security procedures in the houses of Congress. For example, they had a student class there that day also. So you have these 4 Puerto Rican revolutionaries walking in, fully strapped, and they were able to enter the House of Congress from the upper floors. Mm-hmm. And there's some testimonies from a congressional aide who was, actually that's not the, but he was 16 at the time. He later went on to be a congressperson. But he said what sounded like an explosion of fireworks. So there was very rapid fire. You have live ammunition, ricocheting off marble and wood, and creating this. When bullets ricochet against those 2 materials, it creates like a dust.
Right.
So you have like sand.
I think we lost Corinna for a minute. But, until we get her back, I wanted to share this Cosmopolitan article. Is she there? Okay. Well, all right. Well, until we get her back, I wanted to share this Cosmopolitan article, and then I wanted to see what you had to say about it, Matt. Oh, there she is. Okay. There we go.
So this attack resulted obviously in their immediate arrest, and the media and the U.S. government was fairly surprised about was their docile demeanor when they got arrested. And again, because their intention was not to escape, it was to die for legal. And I'll share with you a note that was found in Lolita's purse. And of course, she expected that, and this would be found in her purse. But it's a very beautiful couple of sentences wrote, which, you know, let's have the reason come from her as to why they were there. Let's see. Okay, so this is what the note inside her purse read. Before God and my world, my blood claims for the independence of Puerto Rico. My life I give for the freedom of my country. This is a cry for victory for our struggle for independence. The United States of America is betraying the sacred principles of mankind in their continuous subjugation of my country. So that was to be her note that was going to be found. And they were sentenced, all four of them, to 49 years in prison, but the sentence was commuted in 1979 when Jimmy Carter pardoned them and they were released. There are some people that say that this was done as an agreement for release of some U.S. people that were being held in Cuba, but the White House denies that. And so LeBron was kind of went on to be a very famous revolutionary independence figure. She went on to, she reaffirmed a commitment to nonviolence. However, she was very instrumental in continuing the Puerto Rican cause for independence. And so this is a very sharp contrast to what we saw on 1/6, right? We have a clear set of demands, a lot of organization, the intention. So it's very different, but I think we'll get into that, or we'll lead into that when you're ready to talk about comparison. That is kind of the short story of what happened, what built up to that day and what that day in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, Corinna, thank you so much for that history. And that history is really important to two things, I think. One is we have to be really careful when we're listening to the media talk about the history of anything in this country, because they lie and they leave stuff out. They especially leave like the salacious bits of U.S. history out, because imagine if anybody on CNN or MSNBC told this story, then they would have to tell the history behind the story. They would have to tell this. Let me see if I can pull this article up. Cut that out, Cosmopolitan. And this is in Cosmopolitan magazine. Let me know if you can see this on my screen. And this was just published on January 11th. And it says, with the story of Lolita LeBron, we already know what would have happened if the Capitol rioters were by POC, Black and Indigenous people of color. And there is the compare and contrast of the smiling white dude at the Capitol, you know, making off with Nancy Pelosi's lectern, having a grand old time. And there is Lolita LeBron and one of the other three men that she was with. They were, as you said, they were arrested. Now, this was done, and Cosmopolitan tells the history, a part of it. They don't tell all of the history of the U.S. colonization of Puerto Rico.
Right.
But they make it clear to indicate that this action was in response to a massacre that the United States imposed upon the people of Puerto Rico in Ponce, 2 decades before this was done. And it goes on to give, you know, the highlights of the history that you just gave, Corinna. And this is a photo of all of them being after they were detained. It's noted in the article here in Cosmopolitan that LeBron shot the bullets into the ceiling. She didn't expect to die, but she also wasn't intending to kill anyone. Like you said, Corinna, she expected to herself. I'm sorry, she didn't expect to kill anyone, but she did expect to die.
Right.
But she was arrested. So, when we look at this, oh, you know what? I just realized you couldn't see all of that. There we go. There's a picture. There's the article. Still trying to figure out how this restream business works. So here's the article in Cosmopolitan magazine, of all places. Just wild. And this is the headline. It was published just on the 11th, a few days ago. There's a picture of smiling, stealing lectern guy, in his Trump regalia, having a grand old time, walking out of the U.S. Capitol with Nancy Pelosi's lectern. Trust me, I don't give a shit about Nancy Pelosi and her lectern. That's not even the point, and whether he stole it or not. But the contrast between what these people did on Wednesday and why they did it with what the Puerto Rican nationals did in 1974. No, I'm sorry, in 1954, in response to a U.S.-led massacre against pro-independence protesters in Ponce, Puerto Rico. We have to be clear that Puerto Rico, and again, that article is in Cosmopolitan magazine, of all places. I don't know when Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan got politically astute, but it's been pretty great to see the stuff coming out of Teen Vogue, at least. And it was a nice surprise seeing that coming out of Cosmopolitan. But, when we look at why Lolita LeBron and those four men did what they did, Matt, at the Capitol, and we compare it to why these Trump supporters did what they did last week, this is not something that can be compared at all. I mean, yes, Lolita and her compatriots were sentenced to decades in prison, and their sentences were commuted, and that's fine. But it sure is taking the FBI a good amount of time to find all these people that were in the Capitol that they have incredible surveillance for. And, they have access to everyone's social media. We know they read that our social media posts. They can find us if they really want to find us. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, what I would look at when I want to look at what happened at the Capitol, I would compare that more to kind of like the presidency of Andrew Jackson, right? So Andrew Jackson comes into power, and before him, everyone preceding him was either one of the founding fathers, signatory of the Declaration of Independence, or the son of a founding father, right? So everyone before this is kind of seen as part of this like new aristocracy. Andrew Jackson is seen as a man of the people. He's seen as different. Now, obviously, Trump's not that, but that's how he's perceived for some reason. And so, like this kind of violent frontiersman, dirt under the fingernails. We're gonna get mud all over the White House. We're gonna tramp our boots everywhere. That actually happened during the presidency of Jackson. He actually opened the White House up to these guys to tramp their mud all over the boots, and they weren't poor. I mean, they were but that actually happened. If you read the book of Ed Baptiste, he writes about it. So that's why I would compare them to. But now, when looking at what happened with Puerto Rico, now that is rooted in a completely different history. I'll go over it really briefly, but like just to look at the history of the colonization of Puerto Rico. The Spanish invaders first come to Puerto Rico in 1493, and it takes them some time to establish kind of colonial government there. In 1508, Ponce de Leon is the first Spanish governor, this dictator of Puerto Rico. Within 3 years, in 1511, there's already an uprising, right? Wow. You go, Korean touched upon the uprising in 1860, so this is even before the Spanish-American War. During the Spanish-American War, what comes out of that, the Spanish-American War, much like the Russo-Japanese War, are kind of setting the stage for World War II. These are the inter-imperialist wars. These are the wars of the industrializing nations to colonize the world, right? Set the stage for World War II. Set the stage for World War I, the stage for World War II, which sets the stage for the world we live in today, where America's dominant power. But in that time, what was going on was that the America was driving Spain out of its colonies so they could get access to both the resources and the markets that Spain was holding. And so what came out of that was they got Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Now, in many ways, Guam and the Philippines much like Puerto Rico, are still dominated by U.S. capital. An example, this basic example of this is that the Philippines is one of the world's largest importers of rice. Now, the Filipino people, that live in the Philippines, they've been eating rice since people have lived there. That's part of their staple of their diet, right? Yet they find themselves importing rice for some reason, right? Because they're dominated by U.S. capital, right? Similar situation in Guam. There's military bases everywhere. There's military bases everywhere in the Philippines. Now, in Puerto Rico, there's an even more direct colonial stature, though, because the Philippines and Guam, they get nominal freedom, but in the case of Puerto Rico, it's still very much held as a territory, so has a very colonial status. So in 1920, they passed something called the Merchant Marine Act, which has wide implications, but specifically to Puerto Rico, what this prevented was the development of any kind of their own industry, their own shoring industry, their own ability to control their shores. Now, if you're an island nation, the inability to do that is really, it's going to be hugely detrimental. And in addition to the fact, so all the imports that were coming in are hit with an extra tariff. So it's really, the cost of living in Puerto Rico is very high in comparison to the wages, right? So it's like impossible to get anything started. Now, in addition to the fact that it's costing them so much to import food and costing them so much just to live, U.S. agribusiness, before that Spanish agribusiness, enforced monoculture on the soil, so that Puerto Rico became this place where you grew sugarcane, right? Now, the most famous probably instance of monoculture in world history that led to disasters is the Irish potato famine, right? So Ireland didn't just grow potatoes; that was forced upon them. But then eventually, because potatoes don't really grow in the Eastern Hemisphere, that caused everything to go bad and people to die. And right, so similar situations all throughout the world happened, right? All throughout the world. And so the monoculture was forced in Puerto Rico, monoculture of sugar, same thing in Cuba. And so these are the kind of conditions they found themselves in as early, in this new period of American colonization, 1920. Well, as early as 1922, the Puerto Rican National Independence Party was formed, right? Within that, a man named Campos, he rose to power. I always get his first name. I always butcher his first name, but Campos. Just look it up. Campos. Mm-hmm. He comes to power of the national Puerto Rican leadership, and the organization takes a completely different turn, much more militant turn, much more willing to bear arms, much more willing to really, really fight this thing out. And under that direction, all these they have all these kinds of battles with the government, and that is the party that Lolita LeBron joined, and that kind of sets the stage for why that was happening. So, but this history begins before that massacre. Before that, it begins with the very colonization of Puerto Rico. It becomes with the slaughter of the Taino people. It begins with this 500-year history of stolen lives and stolen land that defines so much of life on the Western Hemisphere. And the attack on the capital, or the whatever you want to call it, the capital, looting of the capital, the sullying of the capital, whatever that was, also is rooted in 500 years of stolen lives and stolen land. That is a celebration of it. That is that Jacksonian type of frontiersman kind of get her done kind of spirit. That pushed that. And it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, when you said "get her done," I was like, you know what? When I was watching this on the news, I was like, I think these people are down there talking about "get her done." Let's just get in there. Yeah, let's get her done. I swear that is exactly like the attitude that I feel like a lot of them had, and I hate to say that because I'm a country girl. I was born in a little town in Jarrett, Virginia, 90 miles south of Richmond, and that's country. That is below the Mason-Dixon line. That's country. It's the South. But that's not a stereotype. They're like that. A whole lot of them are like that. And it was just, it was funny to watch with that soundtrack in my head. But I definitely see the Jacksonian influence in their thinking. Jackson slaughtered indigenous people under this manifest destiny idea that all of this land was white people's because they were white people, because look, the indigenous hadn't done anything with it. We're going to do more with it than these savages will. And I couldn't help but hear or feel that vibe Ernesto, when I heard people say things like, this is our house. And the one guy, and I actually did laugh at this. And I was like, I was on the phone with my family because my family, they were like, "You are not going down there, are you?" I'm like, "Oh, this is right on right crime. Why would I go down there? I'm gonna let these people work out their little issues amongst themselves. I ain't going down there. They don't trust me. They don't pay me enough money to cover this kind of thing." But as I was on the phone with my dad, they talked to some reporter was talking to the guy who said into the camera, "This is our house. We built this." And I was like, I don't think so, dude. But I don't know, Ernesto, what were your thoughts on that whole fascist uprising at the Capitol? And from your perspective on the history of indigenous and the Raza people, what does this even mean?
Yeah, I do remember I heard that clip as well, and I was like, well, I mean, you didn't build it, actually. I mean, I guess it is yours because it's your nation, but you didn't build that. Someone else.
Point.
That somebody else built that, actually. Seeing that happen, you have this group of people, Anglos, European Americans, the people that describe themselves as Americans, as the Americans. You have this group of people who this nation was built for. It was built for them on our backs. On our backs with our labor. And so they're used to that. After so many generations, they're used to just seeing that, and that's the only thing, and within the past maybe 30, 40, or 50 years, we have grown in numbers and in population, both the Raza and African people, we have grown in numbers that they're just not used to that, and they don't want to see that, because it scares them. Because see, the United States, the actual history of the United States isn't this like glorious, search for freedom and emancipation or whatever. No, it's the story of European invaders that built a nation by subjugating other peoples, and subjugating other nations, and even in that same process, creating other nations. And that's where the Chicano people come in. We're a result of all that. We're a result of not only what Spain did to us, but of what 20 years after that. When we thought we had kicked out the colonizers, and they just came back, but speaking English. And so yeah, exactly like you were saying. I was seeing that, and I mean, obviously, the first thing you're like, well, we would have never even gotten that close. Never.
Yeah.
And if we would have tried, we would have tried, we would have died. It didn't rhyme.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, like, when you said we would have never gotten that close, like when I first saw them, surge past the barricades and whatnot, I just thought about how, like, when we went down to there was this big Black Lives Matter rally that was down there, and we marched past the Capitol, and like we knew that we could not go on the steps. I mean, that is just like the rule, and if you can walk on the little plaza, but you can't go up the steps, and if you go up the steps, a Capitol police officer will appear out of fucking nowhere and sternly remind you to get off the step with their hand on their gun. I know this because I've done it a couple of times, trying to, one time was my dog's fault. But I mean, I just remember like the outsized police presence in those areas where they did not want us to be at all. And it was just crazy to me to see all these people so easily, like the fight over the partition between the cops and the people, and I'm looking at these cops just like lose this battle over this crowd barrier, and I'm just like, y'all ain't even trying, are you? You're really just not trying to suppress those people like I know you can. You know? And it just, I think every person of color who has ever been in any demonstration against the police state, the government, you know, any type of injustice, understood on the 6th that we would have never gotten the kind of I don't want to call it rape, because that's not, we wouldn't have gotten the kind of treatment that they received. A lot of us, they'd still be, you know, washing our blood off the stairs.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, we all know that's true. And I was writing, when you were talking, Matt, I was writing some notes down, because when you said the monoculture that was pushed on Puerto Rico and on Guam and on the Philippines and on even Ireland, here's the connection between our struggles. This also happened with Haiti. This is also the reason that Haiti, one of the reasons that Haiti continues to suffer economically, because Haiti, like Puerto Rico and like the Philippines, had their own farming culture. They relied on their own farming produce. And Phil Winter over here in the chat said Jamaica too, the same thing. Anywhere you find U.S. imperialism, you will find that the United States has imposed these laws banning countries from using their own manufactured goods or produced goods and forcing them to import U.S. or other goods from other countries, basically making these people pay for stuff that they could produce themselves.
And they also do this thing where they say that, look at, the world is starving, right? And we're gonna do something to help feed the world, right? Mm-hmm. They actually end up imposing these monocultures. They actually end up imposing. I remember looking this up one time. Philippines was the world's largest importer of rice, and Thailand was the world's largest exporters of this, right? And you have hungry people in both these countries, right? And then you have one country where the rice is being taken out, one country where the rice is being prevented from being born or being grown, so that Cargill, a company based in San Francisco, can make money. I mean, that's essentially, you know, when you follow all the little lines, what was happening in that scenario. So I mean, you know, these scenarios going on all over the world, like you mentioned Haiti, Mexico. I believe today is the world's second largest importer of corn. You know, and this is like the staple of this diet that has existed for thousands and thousands of years. So I mean, there's just again and again and again and again across the world, and Puerto Rico was no exception. That was in Puerto Rico. In fact, Puerto Rico might be an exception because it's just so bad there. I mean, it's just so horrible in the way in which, you know, their industries are prevented from being born. I mean, Haiti is another great example. I mean, Haiti might as well be a direct colony in a similar vein to Puerto Rico. I mean, the amount of the import export kind of deals that they have there to just prevent an economy from being born, and then they point at the place and be like, look at this place, it's so poor.
Right.
But now the greatest example, counterexample we have though is in that same area of the world as Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. You have a place called Cuba. Mm-hmm. And in Cuba, you don't see these kinds of problems, and there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm. That's right, and it is the struggle against imperialism, U.S. imperialism this time, and I think that was the other thing that I made a note about. I mean, when we talk about the fight against imperialism today, of course, the focus is U.S. imperialism, because the United States is the bully on the block, as you know, as far as imperialism is concerned. But they weren't the first. I mean, there was Spanish imperialism and colonialism. There was British imperialism and colonialism. There used to be a saying about the British Empire that the sun never set on the British Empire because it spanned across hemispheres. That is not the case anymore, because as all empires go, they acquire so much property and so many colonies that they literally can't support them anymore. And they can't support them monetarily, but they also can't withstand the constant uprisings against the empire. that always happens in empires. Why come? Because people don't like to be lorded over by some foreign entity telling it what to do and not having a self-determination for their own people. That's historically just true. So, we have this, we see this long line of a struggle against imperialism in general in Puerto Rico, and the United States is still imposing modern day colonialism and imperialism on Puerto Rico because they're still a colony. They are not a state, right?
Yes, that's correct. And again, we saw a very horrifying example of colonialism unveiled in Puerto Rico after the hurricane that devastated them and left. Right. That was a gross reminder of that colonialism actually looks like, having people sitting in desks for months and months and months with damaged homes, no rooms. And on that point that you just mentioned, Jackie, I found a quote by Huey P. Newton that's kind of relevant to this, the tie into the common struggle against colonial powers. He said, in 1917, when the Russian Revolution occurred, there could be a redistribution of wealth on a national level because nations existed. Now, if you talk in terms of an economy on a worldwide level, on an intercommunal level, you are saying something important, that the people have been ripped off very much like one country being ripped off. Simple reparations are not enough because the people have not only been robbed of raw materials, but in wealth accrued from investments of those materials, an investment which has created this, technological machine. And so the people of the world are going to have to control that, at some point. And so he's talking, I think, about the need to understand that the United States is not just really a nation anymore. It's a global empire, right? So right. In that sense, we have to understand what I think he means by how the world is hooked up. It means to recognize that a capitalist imperialist ruling class and that is now transnational. So in that sense, the U.S. is not just anymore, but a global empire, right? We have a small group of ultra-rich capitalists who control the wealth, and all the systems of communication and media, as we're seeing right now, public speech has already been privatized, on social media platforms, and the overall means of production. This can't, exist forever in contrast with the interest of humanity, So this struggle to control generates anarchy and chaos at times as the system, is ultimately going to collapse. We know the capitalist system has so many internal contradictions that the way it's not going to, implode upon itself at some point, as it is already actually doing now. So I guess that's what the revolutionary intercommunalism is about, that we can talk about, the need to develop that. And one thing, Jackie, that you mentioned with the Euro Americans when they came to one thing I think is something that we don't mention fairly often is when European Americans came to this hemisphere, they didn't just come to steal land, right? That wasn't the only thing they had to accomplish, because they also had to smash a communal system that they encountered here. They had to smash a communal system, a communal ethic, in order to make themselves successful. And then ironically, in light of, how we're descending into more and more in this chaos before it gets better, and ironically, a return to the communal ethic is what world populations are going to need to survive this, crisis that is going to become more and worse, even if it's for any kind of time, even for a short time. A return to that communal ethic is going to be what is required. And so we have I think as the system becomes more and more out of control, and it's just exposing itself worse and worse, which is why Trump is bad for the brand, and he had to be replaced by a little bit more decorum for the U.S. empire, just a figurehead, and Biden, right? That's why we have a great window of opportunity now to, as the system, the capitalist system is being more and more exposed. We have an opportunity to build that revolutionary communalism with African nation, with Chicano nation, with Raza, all the oppressed peoples, the nations that are here.
And see, that's why it was important for me to have this conversation now, because I just feel like, and I don't know how you guys feel about where we are in this struggle, but I just feel like if we don't get our collective, intercommunal, international shit together quick, like we're already in a struggle, and we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we have got to get connected on these issues that affect us all, that are interrelated to all of our struggles, because that's the only way we are going to be able to have anything like a coalition or a network that is going to be able to prop anything up of value when this system finally does fall. And I feel like it's closer to falling than we realize. But I don't know how you guys feel about it.
I wanted to say something, touch on what Karina was talking about a minute ago. She talked about, this accumulation of wealth that's going on right now. During the pandemic, Elon Musk has increased his fortunes by $170 billion. Right now, he did not do that by selling Teslas. He did not do that by selling SpaceXs or spaceships. He did that because there's a speculation on what his wealth could be, right? Previously unheard of, this type of gaining of wealth and not actually being a successful business person. I mean, like, define success. Yes, they're ripping, they're exploiting, they're this or that. But Henry Ford sold cars, right? Carnegie sold his steel. Rockefeller sold oil. I mean, he guys, they sold their product, and that's why they were they were. It was vicious. It was cruel. It was wrong. It was murderous. I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying, but they actually had a finished product.
Right. They had products that people bought. Right.
No, Tesla is not, Elon Musk is not what he is because of the amount of cars he sold. He is what he is because we live in a time of fictive capital. We live in a time where the derivative market is 12 times the size of the world product. We live in a time where things are just made up. And under those conditions, they will kill you for any reason in order to maintain a world of rich and poor, because the old way of capital relations is breaking down because production is being automated. I mean, production is being automated, and the sole source of value under a capitalist system is the exploitation of the individual worker. I mean, of the worker, of the worker's individual and of the collective of the workers, right? That's being removed. And under those conditions, where people are just billionaires because we fucking say so, that means you're gonna fucking die. That's what that means. We'll fucking kill you because this whole thing is bullshit, and it makes it so much more unstable. The fact that Elon Musk can become the world's richest man for no reason, other than he sounds cool, or he sounds cool to them. He's the cool kid amongst the Silicon Valley set, right? He's the one that seems the coolest, seems the most Steve Jobs-ish, seems the most think different kind of guy, whatever. And he could be elevated to be the richest man on basis of this is not the same. This is not like Henry Ford 2.0. This is completely different. And under these conditions, it's completely so much more unstable. The future is so much more uncertain. The guiding logic is so much more absent. These are going to be very, very scary times up ahead, because we're looking at the connection of worker and owner in a way that's going to explode the future. And they're trying to maintain the world of rich and poor, right? And that's what's going to happen. And so, we need to fight. We need to seize the means of production. We need that whatever is produced, we need to own it. Things need to be nationalized or internationalized or what have you. They need to be owned by the people, or the people will die. Not the people will be exploited. Not the people will have horrible lives. Not the people will be killed. The people will die. So that's kind of the stakes are rising.
It's crazy to me what you just said about Elon Musk and the way people thought that he was cool, because I always thought that, and I understand that Americans are incredibly propagandized, and we don't know good entertainment or good art if it literally like punched us in the face repeatedly and said, I am actual art. That we just that's what we think art is. It's like something that shocks us and is extremely provocative and is messy and I feel like when Elon Musk did his little like pot smoking thing on, what was it, Joe Rogan's show, I just kind of felt like y'all just don't require much, do you? I mean, this is it. Like in my day, I'm starting to sound like my mother. It's just really, I feel so awful. But I mean, I'm 53 years old, but you couldn't just be cute, right? Like Billy D. Williams was handsome, but if he had opened his mouth and he had like a Pee Wee Herman voice, that would have been that. No, that would have been done. If that man could not dance, if he couldn't lay on the charm, like you can't just be cute and like capture the attention of all these people. But it's like these people, that's all Elon Musk was. He was just edgy. He was just really like edgy. And not even in a way that was actually edgy. It's like you're sitting on a YouTube show, smoking pot and telling really bad jokes. And that gave him this cult following among young millennials that let them that caused him to let him get away with saying shit like, we can do whatever we want. And talking about the coup in Bolivia blew my mind. I was like, that's a whole other level of propaganda right there. That's some slick stuff. But let me get to this question about propaganda and the way we propagandize, even with our history. And Ernesto, I'm wondering, I want to hear from you. Like Trump, his last official trip was to go down to the Alamo, go down to the southern border and to go down to the Alamo. And I feel like the history of the Alamo is, of course, told from a very Euro-American, very American first, American exceptionalism perspective. But we don't get the significance of the battle that the Alamo was in and why we should stop just talking about remember the Alamo. I remember the Alamo because all the white people died. That's I'm just like, and whenever somebody says that to me, I'm like, you want to know why I remember the Alamo and smile fondly? But Ernesto, you tell me why we should really remember the Alamo for what it was.
Because the wall didn't work. We jumped over that wall and we kicked their ass. I think, the Alamo is a perfect example of how we and we're talking about propaganda and the way, history in the United States is taught. This whole notion that we're one nation under God. They even made us do the Pledge of Allegiance when we're kids. And that we all somehow share some, common origin and common present and common future, and we don't. Again, the United States is built, by taking from here and here and here, and then even taking people away from their homeland to make them slaves here. And even that, the way they frame that, they say, oh, all the slaves. No, all the people you made slaves, not the slaves, as if, African people were just slaves just out of nowhere, but it's that whole history, the United States came here and imposed itself on a completely separate nation that was trying to develop, and so they teach this contradictory history, that remember the Alamo when we Americans defended liberty and all that, and that's completely the opposite. I mean, And they even say it as if they even won that battle. They lost that battle.
I know.
And that you have those pictures of Davy Crockett all heroic, like killing 10 Mexicans with one bayonet.
With his bear skin was raccoon skin. That's what it was. His raccoon skin just sticking around. The claws on the raccoon skin.
Yeah, swiping everybody. But the Mexican account of that is that he died groveling in pleading for mercy, and they were like, "No, man, look what you did."
He should have.
He should have, and these people, these defenders, what they were defending was that the history is that they would whatever was Mexico, back then, and the Spaniards left, but we still had some of the criollos, the Spaniards born here in power, or the lighter skinned, quote unquote, mestizos, which mixed people, and so they were in charge, right? But they were west a little more,
You ducked out a little bit, Ernesto.
Oh, that they were trying to increase the population of the Southwest, back then. So the Mexican government allowed for these European Americans to immigrate into what was then Mexico, which was Texas, was right there on the frontier. These people came, and they were supposed to obviously follow Mexican law, which one of the main things Mexican law said is slavery is illegal.
Right.
Because and this is I think something that we're talking about. What are the common things we have as a people is the people that are considered Mexicans today were slaves to Spain. We were slaves to Spain. We have the missions. The missions throughout California, even in Texas. Those were slave camps. And then they're all the way throughout Mexico and down into Central America. These missions were slave camps. Where they forced people the same as they did to Africans in the Southeast. Force them into labor or into working the land or whatever, and then just die as like animals, like chattel. So that was outlawed here. That was outlawed here before the United States ever outlawed slavery. There was still slavery in what was obviously because we still had this, or they still had the Civil War over there. But they conveniently erased the fact that these people kept coming in and bringing people as slaves, and the Mexican authorities said, no, you can't do that, man. Stop, you're gonna stop doing that, or you can't be here. And so that just like these people storming the Capitol, oh my God, our freedoms are being denied.
Wow.
That I can't believe it, and they
so oppressed because I can't have my slaves.
I can't have my slaves. Oh my God, I just want my freedom to have slaves. And even the way they worded it there, they fought for their independence. How can you fight for your independence if you're invading another country? You're not fighting any independence. You're just a crybaby squatter that wants their way. Does that sound familiar?
That's true, though. And I hadn't even thought of it like that until you just explained that way, Ernesto, that the settler colonists who, they were invited by the government of Texas for whatever reason to settle there, just didn't want to follow the rules. They came there and they're just like, we know what the rules are, but fuck that. We want to do our own thing. And it's the same thing here. I mean, these people, they are angry because, for two reasons. Because basically, like you said, Karina, capitalism has failed them. Capitalism has failed people miserably. And these folks know that, but instead of uniting with the anti-capitalists and the anti-imperialists like ourselves and working class, poor, and oppressed people, no, they want capitalism to work right again.
Yeah, right.
So they understand what capitalism is, and they don't care that capitalism crushes and oppresses working class and poor people. They want it that way because that's how they make their money. They just want to keep making their money. So that's why they decide, okay, fine, we'll participate in in this electoral process. But, you know, we didn't get our white supremacist capitalist savior to fix all this stuff for us. So now we're going to tear down the symbol of capitalism that isn't working for us. Not that they don't have freedom. And the other part of this was the whole the whole mask thing. Yeah, closing businesses was, yeah, it hurt their bottom line, and workers lost their incomes. But instead of being angry at the government for not providing support for people, these people are mad at the government because the government shut down businesses and told them to wear a mask.
Yeah.
It's like their white supremacy and settler colonialism and manifest destiny propaganda in their brains could not get them to make that 1/4 step toward, you know what, capitalism sucks. You know, this is why isn't my government providing for me in this unprecedented time? It was like, well, the government isn't doing anything, so it's everyone else's fault, and let's go storm the Capitol, not asking for anything, no demands. I would have had a little teeny tiny bit more respect for them if they had gone up in that joint with some demands like, listen, y'all go. I mean, if somebody had a, you know, look, while we're in here, hold on, I got some demands right here, let me read them. And, you know, pulled out a bullhorn and was like, look, we want those checks, you know, and make them retroactive, and, you know, do this and do that and provide PPE for the people. But no, they just smeared shit and piss all over the place. And
yeah. And, you know, and
it's not like I'm mad that they did it. It's just like, you could have stayed home and did that. No.
Yeah. And then, you know, and listening to you just talk about that right now, Jackie, it just kind of strikes me as how, you know, schizophrenic the American mind is, because then you have the people that you know are on the one side storming the Capitol to retain their, you know, their morality, their human dignity, because they are entitled to all the things that manifest destiny prescribed, and they are fully, you know, engaged or fully committed to the idea that the American dream exists and it's for them, and they have to demonize somebody else, right? But on the flip side of that, you think they're, you know, what the state is going to do now is they're going to use that liberal revulsion against Trump to pass through, you know, and his MAGA followers to pass through legislation that is far more worse than anything Trump could conceive. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be, you know, that's going to be the linchpin of fascism right there, is through the liberal bourgeoisie, just as Mark said, you know. That's the way it's going to happen. And, you know, and then John Lewis said something very interesting today on your show, Jackie, that you did earlier. Mm-hmm. He said that the U.S. developed a governing model that masked the reality of the dictatorship of capital by instituting a system of limited democracy. But the economic collapse of 2007 and 2008, the rise of Trump and COVID, and the Trump rebellion has forced the ruling class to reveal itself. So you have this, you know, paranoid schizophrenic episode of, you know, a system of inverted totalitarianism and the empty shells of democracy. And it's like, you know, it's like the Wizard of Oz, you know, like the wizard is panicking now. Like something went wrong in his control, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. It's like, no, Matt, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to point out that, you know, like in the 1930s, there was this thing called the Bonus Act. You know, these veterans, you know, they went to Washington to get their check, right? What they were owed, and you know, they were, you know, almost.
Oh yeah, the bonus army, yeah,
bonus army, yeah. And Hoover, you know, he set the National Guard on them. You know, you had Occupy, which, you know, was multiracial, but you know, there was a lot of white people in Occupy. After a while, you know, the cops came down and they threw down the batons. I mean, they did here in LA, anyways. You have, you know, the battle for Seattle, which was almost all white, and they were getting gassed, you know, when they were fighting Israel. So, even if you are, I mean, yes, white people get away with a lot more in this country. White people get away with murder in this country. White people get away with all kinds of shit. And the government is less likely to strike you, or they're going to have more patience with you, even if you are opposing them, if you are white. But at the end of the day, the reason they were able to get in there so easily, yes, it was because they're white, but it's also because of what they represented. You know what I'm saying? It's because they represented that. I mean, even I've seen all kinds of protests here. I mean, like these counter. I don't even know what to call them. I've seen like little MAGA rallies, like miniature MAGA rallies in LA. And what they tend to do out here is they want to put the people, the non-whites, whatever, in front, right? The little diversity thing in front to show.
Yeah.
It's really big here in LA to do that, right? So I've been told to
colored MAGAs.
I've been told to go by blacks for Trump, of the Asians, Latinos for Trump. They're like, you're the coconut, all kinds of weird. So that's what they try to do, and the cops don't harass them either. So it's kind of like it's not just what you represent matters. Guess how you look, guess how you are. Yeah, that's gonna determine a lot in your life, but also like what you represent and what you do matters. Who you are and what you're putting into the world matters. And a lot of the reason they were able to get in is because, there's an element of this society that, is saying like, hey man, wreak havoc. Fuck this like veneer. Fuck the decorum. No, we want the pure fucking havoc. Now they are outnumbered by people who are like, no, decorum's a better way because, it's better if everyone's just asleep when we do this, right? And I think that, what Karina was talking about is really what's going to happen. What we're going to see over the next few months is taking down of high-level fascists, high-profile fascists, a couple here and there, but the systematic attack on the left, the systematic attack at every level, of how, from the big ones, the mid ones, the little ones, to, that's what we're going to see, where all of us are going to get shadow banned or whatever they call it. All of us are going to have like trouble. A lot of us are going to get unpublished. I mean, a lot of us are going to get harassed. I mean, our lives are going to be hell. And it's going to come from all kinds of people, and it's all going to be done under the guise of a return to normalcy, unity, a time to heal, enough divisiveness from the right and the left. Enough. It's time to hug. It's time to, it's time to come together. It's time to reunite. It's time to bring us together. What makes us all Americans. That's what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 months. It's going to be horrible.
And we've seen it before, we've seen it. We saw it with 9/11 with, Biden, who always loves to brag about how he was, he's bragged many times that he was the author of the Patriot Act. The schizophrenic state produces the crisis, and then it sweeps through all this draconian legislation to take away all of our civil liberties. And, it is going to get worse before it gets better. I think we have to realize that. I mean, well, of course, people who are, not going to brunch right now, we know how it is when a deporter in chief isn't president. We know what happened during Standing Rock. We know who saw that. There's, we know that the president is merely a figurehead of the state, and the second he becomes bad for the brand, and the second he gets a little too unruly, he will be removed.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's what Trump did, right?
Right.
I mean, let's be clear. Nobody in the ruling class cared about Trump's xenophobia. None of those people cared about those babies in those cages because they didn't care when Obama built the cages to put people in the first place. So, and I know it's a whole bunch of folks watching who are like, "Oh my God, she's talking about Obama again." I'm never going to stop talking about Barack Obama because that man. Not to say that more than any other president, he was a charlatan, but he was the best charlatan in my lifetime that both political parties put forward that duped us all. I mean, a lot of people, like that first term, I'll always tell people, of course I voted for Obama that first term because I really believed that he would be different. And even though I probably didn't understand some things, the depths of imperialism like I do now, I knew that there was something wrong with American militarism, right? I knew that there was something wrong with the war machine and it needed to be reined in, and we're spending way too much money on war and all that kind of stuff. and even when I will never forget this, even when he did he had a speech in front of an audience in it was either Philadelphia or Camden, New Jersey. My husband's hometown, Camden, New Jersey, where he basically gets up in front of these black people and like finger wags at them about raising their kids and
Oh yes, yeah.
yeah, pulling your pants up. And this was when he was campaigning. But then when he goes to Iowa and where all the white people are, he's talking about policy. And even then I was like, well, why can't we get the conversation about policy? We want some policy too. But we're like, yeah, maybe we just got to get them elected and get them in there, maybe. And then 2 years later, I stopped saying maybe, and it's like, oh, fuck this. What the hell? what is this? The only difference between him and the rest of them is he's black. What? So, I mean, and that's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. Yeah. But it's still to this day, and I think that carries over into Biden's administration because Biden is seen as less frightening than Trump. But Biden's policies are Trump's policies, are Obama's policies, are Bush's policies. The policies have not changed. Only thing that's changed is people who is moderating them a little bit left or right to appeal to whichever base, they're trying to appeal to. I forgot what I was going to say because I got sidetracked and pissed off by Obama, which happened.
Joe Biden is a figure that's probably, even rhetorically, right, probably to the right of Richard Nixon. And so
that's true. Yeah.
This is important because this is what the result of this good cop, bad cop game is, right? So like Trump says, Mexico is sending drug dealers and rapists, that guy's a bum, punch him in the face, that son of a bitch is kneeling, he needs to love his country. This is the China virus. He's saying all these really horrible things, right? Okay. Joe Biden comes and says, hey man, you can't go to a 7-Eleven unless you have an Indian accent. Hey, like when I was a pool guard or when I was a lifeguard, I almost got into a fight with this this bad dude, and he was, corn pop. Yeah, so he's talking the story about like how he's gonna like beat up a black teenager when he's like a 30-year-old man or something like that, right? And that's like to show he's got credibility, man. So this guy coming off like Clint Eastwood from Gran Torino or something, right?
That's one of my favorite movies, by the way.
Well, yeah, but he's like, that's Joe Biden, right? He's like Clint Eastwood from Gran Torino. Is seen as a lesser evil to Donald Trump, and I can understand why, because Donald Trump's actually saying like, I'm gonna, like get you sons of bitches. Okay, so this guy over here is the lesser evil, but this guy is more evil than like Nixon, So and in reality, they're all evil, but like just rhetorically, just what you're saying, right? The fact of the matter is, you keep playing this good cop, bad cop. The worse the both cops get. It just keeps going. They go together. They move together. They move in synchronicity. They move alongside each other. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse the longer you play this game of like, well, at least it wasn't that. At least it wasn't that. At least it wasn't that. The longer you stay on this train, the train's heading in one direction.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And Nestor, go ahead, because I think you're going to pick up on where I got sidetracked by my hatred of Obama, but.
No, I mean, it goes along with what Matt said, but I think you said you made a real good point earlier, about these Looney Tunes storming the Capitol. Is they want capitalism to work, and they all this rhetoric about make America great again, or the liberals saying take America back and all that. They're alluding to this period in time, after the world wars, and all that time where the government, the Western governments had to concede a bit to worker movements and stuff like that, because otherwise they were there was a potential for revolutions, or much stronger social movements led by workers. That was bought out, yes, but they're alluding to that, and they're in that type of world, where they imagine the white picket fence in suburbia with a dog and a brand new Chevy in the garage or something. that world is gone. That world is impossible. It's impossible to sustain that world, by exploiting and destroying so much of the rest of the world. So, but they want that fantasy. They want that fantasy to continue, even if it's just a fantasy. They want it to continue, and it's impossible for that to happen. And we don't only see it, within the United States, but even internationally. From in the 2000s, you had the rise, and there was a rise back, a push against them, but you have the rise of revolutionary or socialist or left-leaning governments and movements in the rest of the Americas, that pushed back because they had a chance, a push back against imperialism, like Venezuela, and Bolivia, Ecuador, while a bunch of countries, Nicaragua still there, Cuba, obviously, that stayed strong. It's been staying strong as much as it can since the late 50s. But we have this world that we can't have that. That fantasy is non-existent. It was like fake. But these people want to keep perpetuating that happens, and so the ruling class of this country is split. They're split on whether you have the people on they're all on the right basically, but you have the people on the extreme right, the Republicans, and even more extreme, the Trumpicans, that want things to work the way they have worked so far. White people are the majority. White people say, and everyone else follows. If you don't like it, too bad for you. You better figure out something. Shut up or die or go away or something. That's impossible. That's not happening anymore. There's too many of us. You have the other side still on the right, but the liberals, the Democrats, who have a little bit more of a brain. They're still imperialist and horrible people, but they kind of understand the world a little more, obviously for their own interest. But they understand, hey, we got to sprinkle it with a little bit of color. Put some rainbow stickers on it, because if not, the inevitable will come much quicker. That's what Trump did. Trump was making the inevitable come much quicker.
Right.
And so these people, they're a little bit more smarter. That's why they have the Obamas, or they have the like here in LA we had Villaraigosa as a mayor. And now how you have this cabinet that Biden has, and it's all people of color. Oh my God,
It's a rainbow.
And you have this facade, which is still white supremacy. It's still imperialist. It's still, capitalist. Obviously, it's not going to change. You have and they push this old man that keeps talking about socialism, because they know that rings a lot more in the people today, and but he uses it like a shepherd to bring people right back to the Democrats and continue having this faith in the empire, and this fantasy it's not happening. It can't happen anymore, and that's just the reality. And the sooner we come to understand that, the sooner we'll be able to solve all of these issues that have plagued our people for hundreds of years, and all of these issues that stem out of the United States that plague the entirety of humanity. Where until we come to understand and realize that we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep playing this little game, and these guys are going to keep saying because the only way they can keep this empire alive is by going right. Is by having the capitalists, assert more power and crush whatever social movements they can, and try to crush whatever independent identities from the oppressed, and try to do all this stuff and mask it in progressivism and liberalism and whatever. But that's the only way the empire can survive, by doing that. But little by little pushing to the right. We have a Biden who doesn't say straight up racist. Well, he does, I guess, but he doesn't say it as much as Trump. Well, that's the perfect example. Look, he
put some cute little stories about little black kids caressing his blonde leg hairs at the swimming pool. And cockroaches somewhere. I don't know where the cockroaches came in.
They keep going right and right and right, because that's the only way that the United States can survive. But they get us in this little game of, it's gonna work this time. And how long are we gonna keep saying that, man? It's like, we see some very intelligent people out there, and every 4 years they get duped into this game. It's like, come on, sisters and brothers.
But But you know what? I knew you were going to get to that point that get me back to where I was before I got distracted by, my hatred of Obama. He does that every time. He just distracts me. I think about how much I just so disappointed and just angry at that tool of U.S. imperialism and capitalism, and how easily he just played on his blackness, knowing that it was all just full of shit. But anyway, the idea that the reason those folks were able to get the disproportionately lighter treatment from the law enforcement on hand, aside from the folks who were cops and former cops and off-duty cops and firemen and military in that crowd, but they weren't challenging the status quo. In that crowd, they were mad that they didn't get their white supremacist savior. They were mad that they were mad over a lie about a stolen election. And the crazy thing is, these are people who have never cared about actual voter suppression of Black and other people of color that the same GOP has committed. But all of a sudden, this guy says the election was stolen, and they believe that absolutely, and they go storm the Capitol over that? Really? I mean, but that even them doing that, as much as these politicians say, oh my God, we're so afraid now, they're really not afraid that anything is going to change, because these people didn't go up there to actually change anything, because I think in their heart of hearts, I think they pretty much knew that they weren't going to get them to declare Donald Trump president, to stop the Electoral College validation and declare Donald Trump president. They knew that they weren't going to be able to do that, but it did, I think, prove as an instructive, practical activity for future, kind of things. But here's the thing that I think blows my mind the most. Like, most of the people in that crowd, y'all, were not poor working class folks like us. They were, I see a lot of people, looking at these folks, oh, look at all those poor MAGA supporters. Y'all have never been to DC and seen how much it costs to stay at any hotel in Washington, DC. Even in the middle of this pandemic, you can't stay. The Holiday Inn in downtown DC is damn near $200 a night. So, it might be what, $150 a night, $120 maybe because of the pandemic, but because it's near the inauguration, it's right back up to market rates. So these are, and the hotels are full. Trump Hotel is full of his supporters. There are all these high-priced hotels around the city that are full of these people. Yeah. These people are not poor. They've taken private planes. They've, flown here. Yeah, there is a smattering of working class folks, small business owners, but most of the people in that crowd are business people. Mm-hmm. They're in the business class. They're the petty bourgeoisie, or they are capitalists who really are just angry that they were told that the system, isn't working for them the way they want it to. And instead of, the point I was trying to make was, but that's the reason they were let off the way they were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like they, yeah, there were some instances where the police were wailing on a few folks, but mostly, the police were helping the ladies gingerly down the stairs that they weren't even supposed to be on. Doing what? Yeah, taking selfies. There was the one Black cop. I watched this on CNN when they aired it, and they have not posted it again, but I saw the picture of it on the Daily Mail website of the Black Capitol Police cop who had on a MAGA hat. He was in uniform, had on a MAGA hat. He's talking to 4 or 5 of these Trump supporters. One of them flashes his badge to this dude. And this Capitol Police cop, this Capitol cop with the MAGA hat on, is saying, well, if you could just help me out with getting some of my people out, then, that would be really great. The fuck are you talking about? You are asking, are you sick? And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, clearly I've had too much wine and I need to stop drinking. But I had only had one glass and it wasn't even the whole glass. I had only finished half a glass. And I'm like, what did I just hear? Did I just hear this cop ask these people who literally just stormed the damn Capitol, if you could help me get the cops out of the Capitol, that would be great? When I mean, so I look at that, and of course, there's no way you can look at that and not come to the conclusion that yes, law enforcement was in on it in more ways than one. And I don't care what the media comes to a conclusion with and conjures up. I don't think they're going to be able to cover this up like they have before. I think they're going to have to offer some folks up who they find who have been complicit in it. But there's no way to come away from looking at something like that without coming to that conclusion. But no, go ahead, Matt.
I think it's really important for everyone out there to really this is my opinion, but I think this is what I think people, how I'm approaching this. These people don't, rich or poor or whatever, the people that support this kind of ideology, they don't believe in anything. They don't believe in things. They want things.
Oh, that's a great.
It's that straight up. They don't actually believe in things. So trying to reason with them, it's like it doesn't work. There's no point in trying to reason with them. There's just no point in trying to reason with them. It's just avoid them, defend yourself from them if you have to.
Mm-hmm.
They don't believe in things. It's not fruitful. They don't, because if they believed in something, then you do something else. But they don't really believe things. They want things.
Yeah,
they want
that's a great point. That is a perfect point, and I think that's a perfect way for me to sum up my long and rambling trip to where I was getting to. That is the thing. It's like they really, the politicians are frightened, because their workplace was overrun by, these yahoos. But they understand that these people literally have no intention of actually changing a damn thing they are doing. These people don't pose a threat to the system as it exists and as it is going to continue to exist. We're the ones who pose the threat to the system. And it would have been a threat to the system if any number of those folks out there stopped and said, you know what? We would be so much more effective if we organize with the folks on the left. Maybe the election was stolen, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But I'm kind of mad that the government left us out to dry. But hasn't the left been mad that the government left them out to dry for a long time? Maybe I should go talk to them and see if we're mad about the same shit. But they knew that they weren't going to do that. They knew they weren't going to do that. No, none of those, but that you might get one or two who are going to have that realization that we've got the same enemy. But mostly, like you said, Matt, these people want things from the government. They want their government to work for them like it worked before. And that's why they don't pose a threat to the status quo. So, ultimately, I think tonight, this conversation that we have had about the history of struggle, of Chicano, of Raza people is so interconnected to the struggle of Africans in this country, Africans abroad. There is no way we can talk about the struggles of any of us against capitalism and imperialism and not come to the conclusion that we're all under the same boot. We are all under the same boot. And there's no way I can get free and expect, well, let me put it this way. I can't see myself getting free and leaving somebody else under the same boot. that's a weird ideology that has surfaced in the past couple of years, centered around reparations, that I swear to God, I just don't understand, short of people don't know their history. But when you talk about the history, like we did tonight, and you see the connections in the history, then those arguments literally disappear. So, I mean, I'm going to leave you all with the last word. You know, I hope this is not the last time you guys are going to come on our show, because this has been so much fun. It's been so much fun for me. And there's always so much more stuff that I'm thinking about, all the other things that I want to talk about now. But I'm going to leave you guys with, I'm going to leave you guys with the last word. I'm going to give you guys each the floor and say whatever you want to say, from TELE-JAGUAR to the folks, to the Lukman Nation family. And take it away.
Well, I'll go first. You know, I first of all, I want to thank you for having us on. I really appreciate it. This has been a great time spent. I got 3 real quick points. One is like, okay, if someone's full of shit, you don't owe them shit. So like, you know, if someone's unreasonable, you don't owe them reason. So all those people, if you're trying to engage with them, don't. There's no point. I would encourage when we talk about the other thing we're talking about was like kind of this the liberal whatever. I would encourage your listeners to watch a video from 2016 from the DNC. Speech by General John Allen at the DNC. It is the most ridiculous explosion I've ever seen of this type of ideology. He has a whole gathering of a diverse America. He's got Sikhs, he's got black people, he's got Mexicans, he's got Puerto Ricans, he's got Chinese. Everybody's like, and we're here, and we're Chinese, and we're Puerto Rican, and we're gay, and we're straight, and we're this, and we're America, and we will stand up to our enemies. And so like it was the greatest expression of a rainbow coalition of death that I've ever seen in my life. It was so concentrated. It was just like, so I would encourage everyone to check that out if you really want to see what this Big Ten imperialism is all really about. This inclusive imperialism. The other thing and the last thing I would say is thank you so much for having us talk about Puerto Rico. One of the great honors of my career as a writer and as a poet was actually that I got a chance to open up an event where Oscar Lopez Rivera was speaking at just after grade. And I actually ended up writing a poem that was dedicated to him, and I actually got to read it to him, making eye contact with him. And that was probably, to this day, probably the most.
Okay, I got chills.
Biggest thing I ever got. The most I in my life I've had. So that was, obviously the Puerto Rican independence struggle means a lot to us as Chicanos and to the world. The people of the world. I mean, because it's one of the great freedom struggles that we should all be in support of, and it connects to all of us. Also, they don't want you to know about Ron for the same reason they don't want you to know about Rob. For the same reason they don't want you to know about Terrina. They don't want you to know about the people who had guns and got away with it and survived and walked away. That's what they really. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Matt, you are an author and a poet, so please tell people where they can support your work.
Go to flowersongbooks.com.
Well, say that again because you broke up a little bit.
You can look up the book Mowing Leaves the Grass, and Flower Song will come up. Go to that website and you get the book there. You can get it on Amazon, but don't give Jeff Bezos any more money.
It's Flower Song Press, not books.
Flowersongpress.com. Buy Mowing Leaves the Grass, and that's where you can get the book. So please support that. Support the press. It's a great book. Doing a lot of stuff. And again, thank you so much, Jeff, for having us on. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Ernesto?
Yeah, again, thank you, sister, for having us on. It's always an honor that we're able to share space like this with fellow sisters and brothers. And I think with everything that we're talking about, we're like here in this program, we're African, we're Chicanos, we're talking about Puerto Ricans and all this. I think that shows how the oppressed and colonized can talk about each other and not be in conflict. In fact, be in unity. And that we can decide for ourselves. All these issues that supposedly become issues in between our people, and we fight each other and all that. those are imposed. Those are imposed on us by someone else. That those aren't even issues. In reality, we get along. In historically, we've fought side by side and picked up the rifle or arrows or spears or whatever. We picked up rocks and bricks or whatever and fought together. That's the history of our peoples. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you for letting us come on. It's also an honor to talk about the Puerto Ricanos and the Boricua people that are such a valiant people that have fought and given an example to us, in general, and as Chicanos, there's always been a lot of solidarity between both peoples, between both nations, I should say. I was looking it up last night and I saw, these old pictures of the Young Lords headquarters, and they had Zapata on it, And then I looked up, some of the newspapers, and they had like whole sections dedicated to Chicanos, and it would say from Aztlán, Aztlán is what we call the occupied territory, the Southwest, and they're, they were giving space, and they even had, obviously space for, news from African people, the Black Panther Party in particular. They had, all these different articles, but, we're able to work, and create, despite whatever they tell us on the media and they try to pit us against each other, we historically have. So this is another good, perfect, beautiful example of that. And, thank you for giving us that space. And to my Boricua, Puerto Riqueño sisters and brothers, pa'lante.
Pa'lante indeed. Karina?
Thank you, Jack. I think I would like to remind our audience that no matter who is in office, if it's a Republican, if it's a Democrat, Biden, Trump, we have the same two choices every day, and that is whether we choose to live under the dictatorship of capital or whether we choose to organize for a worker-led revolution. And as I said, we have the opportunity now, as the crisis of capitalism is becoming unveiled, and the schizophrenics of the state are going past all these draconian as we can expect. It's really important for us to build our own platforms to combat the corporate. That's the reason we formed TELE-JAGUAR. That's why your show is so important, because we have our own community-led news, media, and analysis collectives in order to combat this and help to educate and have these kinds of things where we can, get to a point where we are recognize that this.
Uh-oh. She dropped off again. Oh. I know she'll be back in just a second. So let me go over here and read a couple of the comments until Karina hops back. There she is. There you are.
Oh, okay, thanks. And check us out there and build community-led. Take a step towards community-led journalism. Use the platforms that we have for as long as we have them. Get your email in case of a social media blackout. Get an email list. Get study groups in your neighborhoods. Get people's addresses so that we can have ways to stay in contact with each other in the case of a media blackout. And support community media. Support Lukman Nation. And thank you so much, Jackie, for having us on. And we hope this is the start of a relationship where maybe we can feature you and your husband one time, and we'd love to continue this kind of dialogue. Thank you for the opportunity.
This was absolutely my pleasure, and I wish I had done it sooner, but I'm glad I did it in this moment, because I couldn't let this moment pass without having you guys on and talking to you. And I'm so glad that you came on and we took this time tonight. Y'all have been great in the comments. Dust said workers and oppressed peoples unite. Well, Dust didn't actually say that. Dust James, V.I. Lenin actually said that. And that's one of the things that we do in Lukman Nation. We are anti-imperialists, we're anti-capitalists, we're socialists, we are Pan-Africanists, we're internationalists, we are anti-war, we are anti-racist, anti-sexist. We are against the oppression of all people. We fight and work for the freedom and liberation of all people through working class struggle around the world. There is no other way it is going to happen. And we just happen to be literally in the beating heart of imperialism, Washington, D.C. So we know that we have to fight all the more harder here, excuse me, because this is where all of the decisions and power moves are made that affect our brothers and sisters around the world on every continent. So if you all enjoyed this video, and it looks like you did over there in the comments, please share. Please introduce your friends to our comrades at TELE-JAGUAR, and like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can find Lukman Nation again on Patreon. I always forget how to pronounce it. Patreon.com/Lukman Nation, LUQMANNATION. Thank you so much, you guys, Matt Cedillo, Ernesto Ayala, and Karina Acri-Paez for joining me tonight of TELE-JAGUAR. Will not be the last time, and thank you all so much for joining us, for watching us, and for supporting us. We appreciate you very much. And as always, as we've been saying for years on here, hey, Nate, what's going on? Keep hop in at the last minute to show yourself, bro. It's good to see you, though. But as we've been saying for years, oh goodness, I just lost my train of thought. I need to go to bed. As Fred Hampton said, I say to you, peace, if you're willing to fight for it. And we are having to fight for it now. Peace, y'all.
I had them all down before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all down before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, don't you dare give up now. Hope believed in me, pull up, threw some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line up that we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing